Hello. Thank you for taking time out of your schedules today to go over what's going to be an amazing webinar. So far, we have over 1,500 individuals registered, and we'll be starting in just one more minute. Welcome to Right Now Media at Work Live. Thank you for joining us today. I have the pleasure of introducing to you Dr. Henry Cloud, who will speak on the topic of his book, The Power of Other. This book will inspire you to understand why no leader can succeed alone, and while maintaining emotionally relationships are crucial to your success, and how to maintain relationships with the people who support you and encourage you. Dr. Cloud is a clinical psychologist who has written 20 books, including several on the bestsellers list. He is a Fortune 500 leadership consultant and coaches CEOs and executive teams. Dr. Cloud is one of the most qualified voices on the topics of leaderships and relationships. I also have the pleasure of introducing to you Brian Mosley, who is the president of RightNow Media. RightNow Media is an organization that seeks to equip leaders like yourselves with video resources to care for the people around you at work, at home, and at church. Brian is passionate about the content that RightNow Media provides, and he continues to foster innovative ways to equip the church and Christian business leaders. For this format today, Brian will ask Dr. Cloud a series of questions in relation to his book, The Power of Other. Feel free to submit your questions for question and answer throughout the webinar using your Q&A button, and we will try to answer as many questions as possible at the end. I'll now turn it over to Brian.
Thanks, Adrienne. Dr. Cloud, it is great to be back with you again. We have loved just working with you in various ways and are looking forward to actually even working with you again here more in the future. But for today, we get a chance to talk to some Christian business leaders around the country, and just grateful to get to hear some of your insights, especially in this topic of leadership. So I'm just going to kick right in, ask a handful of questions, and then we'll get some questions from the audience in a little bit. So I'm a reader. I read a lot. I enjoy learning as a leader, and a lot of the leadership resources I look at are about me. How to make my leadership more effective, how to be a better communicator, how to be more dynamic. Whatever the case is. But your book and the content around this idea of the power of the other is a little bit different than a lot of those leadership resources. So to kind of set up today, will you give us just a framework for the message behind that book and that content?
Yeah, first of all, it's good to be with you and with everybody. How cool is the world nowadays where we can have all get together at once, and here I am sitting in my den. So here's kind of how it came about. I'm a clinical psychologist by training, but my very first job was in a leadership consulting firm. That's when I first started. So all of my clinical work began really with sitting with CEOs and high-level leaders. And I developed early on a passion for leadership and high performers, and kind of had those two tracks of the clinical world and then the leadership world. And the more I became a student of leadership, I did my doctoral dissertation in leadership personality, and I got into all the literature and research about leadership, and especially all of the popular literature, the products out there, the books and seminars. And basically what you see in that world is a lot of really good stuff on how you need to be as a leader, how you need to execute, how you need to, cast vision, how you need to build critical mass, how you have to be a change agent, and all of that. But here's what we find in reality. In reality, the leader's the one that's got to pull that off. And not only that, the people that he or she is leading, they've got to pull it off too. So you are the equipment, that's all the software of what this computer drives, but you're the one that has to do it. And so you have a lot of stuff in there telling people what to do. But in reality, when we see leaders kind of hit a ceiling, they're hitting the ceiling of the amount of kind of horsepower that sits in the equipment. So when we see leaders get better, this is why leaders get coaches and mentors and development and all of that. The way a human gets to the next level, and everybody hear this, is basically fundamentally the way God has wired the universe, is the way this equipment changes is only in the context of relationship. Now, the simplest example is you take a baby and they come into the world and, batteries not included. There's no software. And what happens is you can feed them and water them and they'll start to grow physically. But if they're not connected with, and through those relational connections, the software is actually downloaded and the viruses are removed and all of that, they don't develop into performers. It's the quality of those relationships. And so what I wanted to do in The Power of the Other was show that you as a leader, for you to get to the next level, we've never known a high performer that did not have certain kinds of formative, ongoing, I don't mean in the early years, but I mean ongoing relationships that actually take them to the next level. Not only that, that's what you have to do with the people and with your organization. Your organization has to have a culture that has leaders and relationships and teams that are working in certain ways. So the first thing is that you got to get oriented past yourself to seeing kind of what's around you. But the second big idea here is this, that, I was in a fraternity in college, I had relationships. I didn't do a lot of development there. So I had fun, right? But so it's not just that we have relationships, but the components of the relationships that coach us and get us to the next level and form us, the components of those relationships are essential. And so what the book is about is how those components work and what we need in our own lives to get better, and also the way we need to be in leadership and constructing our organization so these components are there. If these components are there, people will get to the next level. You've never seen a Navy SEAL that went to a workshop or read a book and became a Navy SEAL. They have relational, deep training with certain components in it through certain experiences. That's how you get a Navy SEAL.
So I want to dive in a moment because you have this great picture of these four corners of connectivity, and I want to kind of talk through that. But it occurs to me as I'm sitting here thinking about it, again, there's a lot of leaders listening to us today. Do you find in your experience that leaders are more desiring of those relationships, or more independent minded, or how would you kind of classify your typical leader and their response to this message?
Well, it's a good question. And I'm glad you said response to the message, because here's what we know about high performance. The reality of how it actually works has never changed. I mean, the laws of physics are what they are, and humans are designed a certain way. I think in previous generations, the messaging about how people work was, it's sort of like the independent John Wayne cowboy rah-rah leader, and they show up and kind of do this. If you look at the video of their lives, that's not what really took place. They had formative, in the book, I take, a whole list of people from Bill Gates to Steve Jobs to, all these people that have achieved all these great things and show who it was that built into them. But I think now leaders now are by nature, or not by nature, by kind of Weltanschauung, the way they think now, that we do have a much more relational, community-oriented generation now. And so it's not hard to talk them into the idea that you need to be in some sort of a tribe or community or relationships, because that's how they live. The question becomes, what's the nature and the components? You know, when I'm in a relationship with you and I'm trying to build you or grow a team or grow an organization, what do I need to show up with? What do I need to emphasize? What do I need to attend to? And what do I need to inhibit to make sure those elements aren't there? That's the key message.
Yeah. Well, okay. So then describe for us those four corners so that we as leaders can start thinking about, you know, where we are on that map and how to fit into that.
Yeah. And I would like for everybody, you know, if you're sitting at your desk or whatever, just get a piece of paper and draw a square. Okay. And because you're going to use this, I think, as a tool, and I'll tell you how to do that, you know, a little later. But think of it this way. You know, if you picture your cell phone, I talk about this example in the book. If you picture your cell phone, you're flying on an airplane, you got it turned off. Now, while you're flying, your phone can do a bunch of stuff, or your iPad can do a bunch of stuff, right? And it's hit a limit. So whatever it already has, you know, the programs, the apps, you know, the emails, it's going to be able to perform at that limit. But what happens is, as soon as you land, you hit a button, and up in the left top corner, you'll see a word, and the word is searching for connection. Okay. Now, there's a chip inside of that phone that is made to, as soon as it's on, it's searching for the connection of the network to connect to. Now, once it does that, what happens? Capacity goes up. You can download new apps, new information. You can debug it. You can do updates to the software. Very similar to that. A human is born with this chip that's always looking for connection. Now, if you notice on your cell phone, sometimes you'll be in an area where there's no connection, and you'll say, no connection. Other times, you'll find a different kind of connection, one that doesn't work. It's a bad connection. So what I try to do in this little model was you take your square, and I want you to number the corners, 1, 2, 3, and 4, okay? Now, there's only 4 possibilities, and I want this square to be your GPS. When a Navy SEAL lands, they look at their GPS, the first question they ask is, where am I? Well, they also ask, where's the enemy? And they ask, where's my buddy? Because that connection is the most important thing. So this little square, there's only 4 possibilities. When you look at that square, that's your GPS. In any given moment of any given day, there's only 4 places you can be. I'm going to name these corners. And there's only 4 places your team can be. There's only 4 places an individual on your team can be. Corner number one is no connection. That's where there's bodies in the room, but we're really not connecting at levels that actually download anything to us or change us or help us in any way. In fact, we know this look at the marriage research, or I do this with executive teams. Sometimes the loneliest, most isolated place you can be is in a relationship or in relationships with others. I did an executive team retreat of a global, public company not long ago. I explained this whole thing to them, and I handed out 3x5 cards, and I said, okay, which corner are you in? And corner number 1 is the one of not feeling connected. Well, the whole team came back and said, well, we're a corner 4 team. We're really connected. Well, one VP, she opened up her card, flipped her card over, and she said, I'm in corner 1. And what they found was that she had been kind of systematically siloed because the CEO was driving stuff that she was supposed to be doing, but it was not something that anybody else was helping with or interested in. And she was about ready to leave, and nobody even knew it. And she felt lonely, she felt disenfranchised, she felt siloed. That's a horrible corner. It's a corner of ultimate low performance. Okay, so move over to corner 2. Corner 2 is bad connection. Now, that doesn't mean it's abusive, or it doesn't mean it has to be mean. It can be. But a bad connection is when you're in relationships or in a circle where there are high expectations or some kind of demand that you feel like you're never good enough to reach. This is a perfectionistic place where, you can't ever please your boss, or they're critical, or kind of down on you, even in a nice way. And people walk around feeling like, the main thing about corner two is I feel like I'm not good enough. I feel like I'm bad in some way. There's a lot of shame there. There's a lot of guilt. There's a lot of fear there. And there's actually, I mean, no doubt about this, there is reduced performance. When people are under the threat of feeling I'm never good enough, then bad corner, okay? So we don't like that either. So what do? Well, let's move down to corner three. I want to feel good, you know? So corner three is the sort of this, I call it the pseudo connection, but it's where people are connected, but it's always in a happy way. And, you know, they talk about the good news. You know, you've seen leaders that don't like to hear the bad news, or everybody tries to sort of like act like everything's going great. And we feel good in corner three, or you might even look for something else to make you feel good to connect with. You don't feel connected to people, so you turn to internet porn or a substance or an illicit relationship, or even higher numbers, you know, making the goals, not trying to make myself feel good. Well, that's like a sugar high. It's going to work for a minute, but it's going to go away, and then you need another fix. So disconnected, bad connectedness, connections make me feel bad, or kind of connections that kind of make me flattered or feel good about myself for a minute. All of those are totally, not only totally ineffective in producing the highest performance, but they're also kind of anti-effective. They diminish performance over time. And you'll see teams and organizations that you can just say, we're a disconnected team, or we're a team that's always down on, you know, critical and negative, or we're a team that's just all about rah-rah and happy talk. Corner four is what I call real connection. And real connection is a place where, and get this kind of, you know, phrase down. Corner four is where need states are transformed. I'm gonna say that again, need states. See, we all have different kinds of need states throughout a day, throughout a week, throughout a season. And when we come into a corner four connection where we can be real, and it doesn't mean that just all positive stuff. It's got to contain the negative stuff. We can be real with our, you know, like we do with our kids at dinner, we have roses and thorns. You know, what was your high point of the day, but what was your worst point of the day? Where we're real and we have certain kinds of responses to that, then when we live there, then what happens is our need states get transformed. Now, let me give you an example. Somebody's walking around working on a project and they feel like they don't have clarity. When they come interact with you with a leader, if you're a corner four leader, in that connection, that 15 minutes, that 30 minutes, that hour, they come in the state of not having clarity. They leave feeling like, okay, now I got a better picture knowing what I'm doing. Okay. They come in disconnected or discouraged. That's their state. Through their connection with you, they leave transformed into now I have hope. Now I feel better. They come in confused without an answer. So what the best teams are teams that basically have two components, the most cohesive teams. They're the teams that every member has a perceived need for that group. So for example, if you have a team meeting, everybody's going, you know, to whoever in their office, hey, I got to go. I need to get to my meeting. You know, it's something you want to go to. You feel like I need to get to this. I need to go talk to my boss. It's a need, not a have to. Second component is there's clear expectations of what I'm supposed to do in that relationship. You know, if people know we come together and we talk about stuff here, or we come together and we're just not going to have an agenda, we're going to process where we are. If we come together and we want everybody to, you know, we need to know how to behave, you know, in a group and kind of what the norms are. And great leaders develop teams and relationships where people actually need that team because they're going to be transformed in every interaction. But not only that, they know how that relationship works. That relationship works. And when I do consulting and team building, I have them talk about that. You know, what is this team? What do y'all need from each other? How are you going to do that in your meetings? How are you going to make sure you're doing it? And you get them working on the meeting, not in the meeting, and you see it transform to corner four.
Hmm. Okay, that's really helpful. So we've got those four corners down. And by the way, for those watching, if you have a question for Dr. Cloud, you can hit the Q&A button. In a little bit, we're going to try to answer some questions. So I'm listening to you, and it occurs to me.
Oh, by the way,
go ahead. Yeah.
Those aren't static. That's not like a personality type thing, even though, it can be because people predominantly might hang out in one. But these corners change throughout the day. I mean, I can feel good, I'm hanging out in corner 4, and all of a sudden, I mean, I can do this on stage. I might be talking to 100,000 people, and I walk out there and I'm feeling connected with the audience, and all of a sudden I say something that, I feel like, oh, we're not connecting, and you can kind of feel that. And then I run over to corner 3. Oh crap, I must have said something stupid. Whatever made me think this talk was ready. Now I'm criticizing myself, man. And then I run down to corner 3 and I'm fantasizing. Can't wait till this thing is over and I'm going to go eat 14 pieces. And kind of we live there. But you can do that throughout the day. You get a bad phone call, you get a bad number, you get a bad whatever it is. I just want people to ask themselves, where am I? And if you're not in corner 4, then you got to find it. And so that's where your buddies can be helpful.
Yeah.
The other thing is, it doesn't always mean that you're hanging out with people. We take corner 4 with us when we're alone. Back to the SEAL teams. If a guy lands behind the wrong side of the wall, or it's got to scale a wall and go take down Osama bin Laden or something, they might be out there 50 yards, 100 yards, a mile away from everybody else on their solo part of the mission, but they know their buddies are with them. They feel that encouragement. They feel that presence, and they know they're just one click away.
Okay, so that's interesting, because that was kind of where I was thinking about this. It's like, even though we're talking about relationships and the importance of those, it sounds like you're saying in any of those corners, we can have the tendency to even trick ourselves, because we may be surrounded by people or think we're in relationships, but it may not be the connections that we really seek. I mean, in other words, the corner 1 or even corner 2 doesn't mean you're isolated. You may be surrounded by people, right?
You might, and most times we are. I mean, who lives as a hermit nowadays, right? But if you look at the quality of the interactions, like how many times have you walked into a boss's or somebody else's office and you talk about something and everybody's been wanting you to go do this. You walk out and everybody goes, how did he go? And you say, he didn't get it. Or, he just didn't connect with it, or he's not hearing me. Or so that's what we're talking about. You're going to have people around you most of the times.
So with our crowd here who are leaders, we kind of have that dual burden of wanting to provide kind of that corner 4 type space to people that are working with us, but we also as leaders need that fuel and need that corner 4 relationships ourselves. So thinking about it from one angle and the other angle, give us a couple practical things for both offering corner 4 type environments to others that we work with, but then also seeking and finding those corner 4 relationships as leaders that are, it's important to us to have that as well.
Yeah. Well, as we go through, the rest of our time here, we're going to talk about some of the specific components and how to do that. But I would start with this. What if you did the little exercise that I do a lot? Sit your team down, put the 4 corners up on, read the book, put the 4 corners up on the whiteboard and describe it. This is kind of disconnected. We don't really get a lot of help from each other or whatever. The corner 2, we're kind of critical and negative. We're afraid to bring up bad news, or we're trying to. Corner 3 is happy time, and just ask the team. So, how do you think we're doing? Where can we do better? And get them oriented to what organizations I work with. They'll use a language now. They'll say, we're getting to be a corner 4 team, or in a meeting, I've heard them say, all right, so let's have a corner 4 moment here, guys. It's time to get real. And so just start to orient your team around a language. And when they get a language, that's, you've taken the first 80% step, getting there. But in your own life, leaders, and I want to get on your case here a little bit, not because you're bad or failing, but because leadership tends to isolate people. Now, it doesn't isolate them in terms of being physically isolated. What it does is it isolates your needs into a corner because you're always on giving mode. You're always on output mode. for a number of years, I did a leadership retreat with the Willow Creek Association, where we would take 25 high-level leaders off for an evening and a day of training. And the first night, I would hand them a questionnaire, and I would ask, a bunch of questions. One of those was, where do you go as a leader? What relationship or relationships do you have as a leader outside of your team, your organization, where you can be 100% transparent, talk about what's really going on with you, what your fears are, what your failures are, what your needs are. That's 100% transparent, 100% confidential, and is literally there for you. 80% of those leaders said, I don't have a place like that. Second question, what relationships do you have that are expressly dedicated to building your performance as a leader, your well-being as a leader? That's the nature of the relationship. 80% of them said, I don't have a place like that. Another question, how many of you would say in the last year you've experienced something like burnout or stress or depression or anxiety or something like 80%? And what we see is that leaders, and I've been amazed at this because I'm a leadership coach and consultant, so I work with CEOs mainly. The highest performers that I have, the highest, and I'm talking about people that lead, public companies, global entities, hundreds of thousands of employees, tens of billions of dollars. The highest performers and the best ones, they use our relationship more than the lower performers. It's this inverse correlation. The higher the performer, the more they steward and make sure they have that relationship or those relationships, and they tend to structure them. They find somebody they meet with regularly. They find a coach or a mentor. They hire them, or they find, a good person in their neighborhood or church or community that, and will you meet with me? Will you help me, in these areas? So I would say this, I would encourage all of you, and this doesn't need to cost you a lot of money. It can, and it does. A lot of people will pay for very expensive consultants, but you can find these for free too. There's somebody older or more experienced that would love to pour into you, but go hire it if you have to. But you got to add structure to it. Second thing is, you've got to get with somebody, bring something to the party. Just because somebody's, been around, they have some success, that doesn't necessarily translate into their knowing what components they're trying to build into you. So obviously I believe in professional coaching and professional mentoring. I would also, for especially those of you with executive teams and higher level teams, hire somebody to come in and build your team. You're going to be doing it for sure, but bring somebody from the outside to help you structure this. And, I know we're talking to a lot of small companies as well. I've got an online program that does this. I mean, it doesn't have to, it's cheap, or it can be, you can get experts. But this is just one example. I've got one client company that spends $100 million a year on coaching for their highest level leaders. $100 million a year. Okay. And their growth rate is through the roof. But they've done that for a long time. It's part of their culture. It's part of their DNA. So the answer to your question is, it's not going to happen by happenstance. Tiger Woods doesn't go to the driving range and say, hey, anybody want to help? He hires coaches. All of them do. All the great performers do. Michael Phelps has had his corner for a relationship in his corner since he was 15 years old on the side of the pool. It doesn't happen by yourself.
Yeah. That's
Does
good.
it sound like I'm preaching? I mean, I'm serious about this stuff, guys.
Yeah. Well, you certainly have seen it firsthand from the number of leaders you've interacted with and the folks that, but like you said, it's just hard as leaders sometimes to find those people that can speak into your life or to have that comfortable relationship. But I do think you're right. We tend to find ourselves a little more isolated, not quite sure who to talk to and not quite sure how to establish those real deeper relationships. So what would be, as you think about those leaders, let's say, you know, us as leaders have kind of established those healthy corner four relationships where we're getting that support. We want to turn our team or the people we're working with, you know, from maybe a corner 2 or 3, hopefully not corner 1, but it could even be corner 1. But how do we help move our team or the people around us towards the more corner 4 type relationships?
Well, why don't we hop into some of the components? And I think that'll also
Sure.
Sort of help us to figure out, when you do that, kind of what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
Let me just give you the book is organized into specific chapters about, you know, these constructs, but the very first thing that you have to think about, you know, when a pilot gets in a fighter jet, okay, let me just ask you, what's probably the most important thing that he's got to make sure he has? It's a trick question. You'll get it at some point.
I think I know the answer, but I'll try. I think he's going to have gas to get off the ground.
There you go. Wouldn't it be nice to know you got fuel? All right. So what's fuel for high performance? The fuel for high performance is relationship. It's connection. There's a reason why a football team can be 3 touchdowns down behind at halftime, and they go into the locker room. The great coaches, they've created a community there. These players get fueled in some way. You know, I love the scripture that says encourage one another, because if you pull that word out, you'll hear a lot of people say, you got to have courage as a leader. Well, where do you get it? In courage. It has to be put into us like fuel. And one of the first things you have to ask is, just sit down with them and say, do you feel like you're getting am I helping you get gas? Am I helping fuel you? Am I taking gas out of your tank? Just talk about the fueling and look at your own life. Where do you get that? Now, some people get recharged because they're introverts by being alone. But you know, I even interviewed Susie King one time, you know, about introversion. And I said, let's just make something clear here. You're not saying that introverts don't need a relationship, right? Because that's just not true. They just don't do it in crowds. And, you know, so for yourself, you've got to ask, when my tank is running empty, who put something into me? Because most leaders are getting depleted in every relationship. I tell a story in a book one time about a huge failure I had at one point with, you know, a company that I had and they put somebody in charge in it, and they ran it down in the ground, and I wasn't watching because I was doing other stuff, and it was just a big mess. And the phone rings that night when I find out all this. I'm at the lowest of lows, and it was my main mentor in life, a guy that everything he's touched has turned into, you know, empires, right? Last person I want to talk to at that moment, because I'm not going to lie to him when he asks me, how's it going? But I got to say, you know, I'm failing, right? And so I said, well, not so great. He said, what's up? And I said, well, and I told him the story, and he listens. And then there's silence. And I'm going, okay, here it comes. I'm kind of like waiting for the spanking, right? And he goes, well, we've all been there. I said, what? He said, we've all been there. I mean, we've all done. Anybody that's ever built anything did that. I said, we? He said, yeah. I said, you've done this? He said, oh yeah. And he told me the story about he had done this. He said, you learn that, you make that mistake, but you never do it again, right? And so he said, tell me about it. So I'm just telling him what's going on and processing. He's listening. And so it was probably a 45-minute conversation. I hung up the phone, and I didn't have the new financing yet. I didn't have strategy. I didn't have the plan. I didn't know how, but I was different. I was out of the hole because I felt like I had gotten fueled. And the next morning I woke up and I went and attacked it, and it took about a year, but I fixed it all. I don't know if that would have happened without that conversation. So the first component is you got to ask and talk about these things. Do we fuel each other well? Do we defuel each other? Do we not provide spaces where we can get fueling from one another? Where are you getting on the outside? So it's kind of that basic kind of connectedness, by which we get fuel.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing is this, that here's what we know about high performers. They are control freaks, okay? Because they're human. See, this is what people don't understand about control issues. Every human is a control freak. God has wired you that way. You take a baby or a toddler and you hit the little, the little pegs and say, watch me. And you're hitting them and you hook their brains up to a scan. They're watching you do this. And there's some activity up there. They're watching you. Then you say this. You say, okay, now you do it. You hand them the hammer. Their brains catch on fire because now they have control of something. See, we were built for something called self-control. And what leaders do sometimes is and we've heard the terms, you're micromanaging, you're not really giving freedom, but there are ways in which leaders take away the freedom for people to really have control of what they're doing. You'll never build anything large if you can't relinquish control, because everything will have to go through you. If the commander-in-chief orders the joint chiefs, in a war, when when Patton had to go do this, the president sent him to take Europe. He was in control of that. And when he gave his orders, they were in control of what they were doing. So you got to watch how you're taking control away from people. It's really, really important. I tell the story in there about, I'm a competitive golfer, and I grew up, Nicklaus was my idol. And so I'm thinking, I'm writing this book and I'm going, what's a great example of self-control where people really have control of their performance? And I remember a shot that Nicklaus hit, 1972, US Open. I was a kid, Pebble Beach. In fact, that's going to happen again this weekend. Pebble Beach, number 17, howling 40-mile-an-hour wind off the ocean, 219 yards into the wind. He's got a 3-shot lead, 1 hole to play. And this is a hole where a disaster can happen. He takes the club back, and as he said later in an interview, when he took the club back, a burst of wind hit him, and it knocked him off balance a little bit. He said, so I had to reroute the golf club, the swing, in the middle of my swing to make up for how I got. And he hits a 1-iron or 2-iron an inch from the hole. I went, now that's self-control. That's the agility and the control you want your people to have when they're out there doing a deal, where they are like, they got to perform. So I started asking myself, okay, where did Nicklaus get that? And I started doing research. And one of his most formative relationships, probably the most formative, was with his father. His father, really kind of, nurtured his golf all the way up. And he tells a story about this. And in fact, he wrote me a letter after I wrote the book about this. And I think it's in the U.S. Amateur. He's 18 years old, and they're having dinner after like the 3rd round or something. And his father says, why did you hit that club on number 0? You should have, And he said, I'll never forget this moment. He said, I looked at my dad. I looked him in the eye. I said, Dad, it's my game. And his dad looked at him and said, you're right. And he said, from that point on, he said he was an unobtrusive champion for me, an unobtrusive supporter. And what you're going to find in great performers is they feel like they're in control of themselves. And what you've got to do as a leader is make sure people know what they own and you allow them to own it. That doesn't mean you don't give guidance. Doesn't mean you don't step in and say no to some stuff. But it means you basically preserve the integrity of they know they own this and they're the ones that have to hit the shot. And when people get this and they feel entrusted with that, and you're also nurturing it by holding them responsible for that, as opposed to controlling it, you got a high performer on the way. Big deal.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm looking at it. There's a handful of questions that I know are coming in that I want to get to, and so I'm going to kind of sprinkle those in here too as we take the next 10 or 15 minutes to get through this. And one is just real practical. Somebody's asking, earlier you said something about, working on being in the meeting versus on the meeting. Will you kind of even clarify what you meant by that for us?
Yeah. So, you take the golf game, for example. We can play golf. You got to play rounds. You're in the meet. You're in the work. We're doing the work. When you're working, that's when you're in your game. But when you're working on your game, you've hit pause and you're getting above it and you're looking at how are we doing? So to work in your team, you're doing work, you're having meetings, this, that, and the other. But one of the disciplines that I do with teams that I work with is I'll have them, as they're working through constructs that they're trying to build as a team, I'll have them build in a structure. Okay, so we're going to take 10 minutes at the end of every meeting, and we're going to say, how did we do? How do we do on, whatever it is they're working on? In other words, you're developing, in psychological terms, it's called an observing ego. Ego means I. It's the I that's looking at me. The difference between a human and a German Shepherd, I mean, I've actually been trained in dog training. I love dog training. I've trained a bunch of German Shepherds, greatest dogs in the world. But a German Shepherd basically barks. I mean, they just operate the way they're wired to operate. They bark. They bark at the window. They bark whenever they bark. But a German Shepherd never stops, takes a moment after they bark and says, I wonder if that was helpful. I wonder if that's going to get me where I want to be on Thursday. Did I bark too loud? Did I not bark loud enough? See, they don't have this observing capacity. That's what a trainer does, right? A human has a capacity. It's the difference in a human and every other species. We have the capacity for observation. So in all the literature now you see about emotional intelligence, all that stuff. What they're really talking about is, they call it emotional regulation. Well, you're talking about the monitoring system of how am I doing? And great teams and great leaders, they get out of the barking for a while and get above it and say, how am I barking? How do I need to work on my barking? What do I need to change? How do I need to get better? That's what I mean by working on it, not in it.
Yeah. I love that example.
It's amazing. It is amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing how often people are so busy doing the work. You got a race car going around the Indy track and they never pull into the pit area.
Mm-hmm.
So they can't make adjustments.
Well, and when you invite, I love your example of the meeting, when you invite others that are in the meeting to say, hey, let's, like you said, at the end of the meeting or whatever, regularly say, hey, what are we doing? How are we doing it? And think above the meeting's agenda. That's a level 4 type of corner 4 relationship, because now you're saying, hey, I want to hear the good, bad, and ugly. Let's talk about this, not just kind of like we're patting each other on the backs and keep moving.
Hey, and it can get fun too. Another thing I'll do is I'll hand out a yellow flag, a referee's flag, and put it on the table. And in a real high performing team, if somebody violates one of these things, somebody throws foul. So stop, And I had a CEO not long ago, an executive team meeting they were having. There was one guy that tended to shut down process because he would get kind of know-it-all and arrogant and dismissive. Oh, well, that's, and the CEO was starting to get this, and he goes, stop. He says, try that again. He said to the guy, say it again. You can do better than that.
Mm-hmm.
And he caught himself. That's working on the meeting.
What about the idea of leading up? If you're not the guy in charge of the meeting, or the lady is the boss, at the top, but you're in the company and you want, this level of a corner 4 type relationship, and you're trying, is there ways you can kind of lead up and help move your team or your organization in that direction if you're not the person at the top of the pyramid?
Absolutely. I mean, relationship has power. And it only takes one person to change a relationship. How it's going to change or where it's going to change or how far it's going to go, sky's the limit or obstacles get in the way. But one person can change it. Like I was talking to 2 people yesterday in a power, or one person in a power struggle with somebody very difficult. This is a CEO of one of the biggest companies in the world. And I said, well, guess what, Bubba? It takes two people to have a conflict. When you're in a tug of war, all you gotta do is drop the rope. You're done. Now what are you gonna do? So you have power. So the first thing, and when people have to lead up, obviously the leaders' problems and issues are very glaring and in their face all the time. But to be a change agent upward, remember what I started with, need states. Okay, we change in need states. We need something, somebody's able to influence us. So you will never be a change agent upward until you become somebody who's drastically needed by that person above you. Or your team is drastically needed by whoever it is above you. So number one is you have got to be knocking it out of the park. And you got to be finding how you best serve them. So you want to lead upward, the best thing you can do is go to your boss saying, I'm doing a lot of work here and this, that, and the other. Help me understand what's the best way I can help you win. What's the most important thing? And they know that your most important concern is helping them win and serving them in the ways that matter to them. And you establish that. That's how you open the door, okay? And then once that's happening, what you're going to begin to see, I've seen this 1,000 times, they start to lean on you. And then you start to have the ability to say, I'm looking at our team and I think we could do better. I think we could perform better. I heard of this course, can you provide this for us? Or I'd like to hire somebody to come in and do some team building or whatever. Or another thing is if they want to do that, I've seen this in a lot of organizations. You're in charge of that team, okay? No matter what's above you, then you start to do it yourself. Have a lunch and learn. Say, hey, I found this book. We're gonna get together for lunch. Send out a memo. Say we're gonna do a lunch and learn. Anybody can come, once a month or something like that. And you start to develop growth in the purview that you have control of. Well, that starts to get the attention of people above you. And so what we're talking about is creating contagious value. And when people start to do that, there was I think I named this company in the book. It would be one that everybody knows, but I can't remember, so I'm not going to name it. But everybody would know it. It's a huge retail chain across the country. I had one team that was in charge of the West. And they go off on a retreat and they said, okay, so what's our vision for this year? So this was their vision. We're going to perform so well that the chairman of the board is going to fly out here and ask, what are you guys doing in the West? Okay, that was their vision. So then they asked the question, if we're going to pull that off, what do we need to look like? What are our valued behaviors that we're going to exercise with each other? How are we going to? So they started to build that team. Okay, now this is a true story. They performed so well that year, the CEO and the chairman, and nobody asked them to do this, CEO and the chairman at the end of the year called and said, you know what, we'd like to sit down with you guys. Okay, that's leading upward. It all starts with getting better, and then you gain access, and then you have something to say.
Yeah.
Now, I say this also, sometimes you've got really toxic leaders, and at that point, when nothing's really working, there should be some kind of way that you can non-antagonistically and non-adversarially go through the proper channels. And ultimately, if you're high enough, it ends up, if you're not getting, there's always a board of directors, right? So ultimately, there's somewhere that you can appeal to. But I would tell you this, if you're in one of those situations, you don't do that from a place of weakness. You got your resume in hand, and you have 15 other opportunities. And when you say, you know what, things got to be different around here in some ways, or I can't stay. And then you got people's attention because they value you.
Yeah. Just a couple more questions here for us today. Somebody's asking, and I think this is a good thing to think through. So how do you improve the connection when you have that bad connection or no connection? You're in that corner 1 or 2, and they're saying, especially it's a kind of a long-term pattern in the workplace, just to have basically no or a bad connection. So it sounds like they're still feeling stuck in a rut. How do you get out of that rut?
Well, the first thing is you got to ask, where's the rut? You know, because a lot of times, 99% of the time, whether it's true on the outside or not, a lot of times it's in us. See, a lot of times we're afraid to ask for help. We're afraid of being rejected. We're afraid of whatever, we're afraid of being vulnerable. And we kind of tend to, by our own voices in our own head, we tend to kind of wind up in corner 1 because of the way we see the world. Maybe you had parents that didn't meet your needs. Maybe you had parents that were critical. You know, a boss says a simple kind of thing about, correcting you, and all of a sudden you feel wounded and I'm an idiot or he's mean or this and the other. It's really, I've seen this stuff. I've seen people go off on tirades and my boss, and I say, well, show me the email. I'll look at the email, or I've heard the conversation. And I go, dudes, that's normal feedback. What's wrong with your head? And so a lot of times, it's sort of like the guy who's driving through the country and has a flat tire. He goes to fix his tire, opens up the trunk, and he realizes he didn't have his jacket. He left his jacket on. He goes, crap, I don't have my jacket. He looks out, there's a farmhouse way in the distance with a light on, starts walking. I'll go borrow a jack. He walks 100 yards, say, how am I going to admit to the guy to travel with that? He's going to think I'm an idiot. That guy's going to throw me out. And by the time he gets there, he has this expectation, right? So he rings the doorbell, the farmer opens the door, and the guy says, just keep your damn jack. He's already reactive, right? And so a lot of times we got to look at, what are my own issues that are, kind of creating this? Now, having done that, then I think you go to that person and you say, I really value our relationship, and I value this team. I really want to perform well for you. I'm kind of feeling isolated here. Am I doing something that's kind of doing that? Do you not have the time? Am I turning you off in some way? Or have you realized kind of what the needs of the team are? I know you're out there charging, but we kind of feel alone here. And just kind of talk to them in the service of, we want to do better, but I'm always feeling like, I'm failing. Am I? And if I am, can I have some clarity about how? I was talking with somebody a couple of months ago, and I said, they were like in this critical kind of, I go, so what's it going to take for me to dig out of this hole with you? I've done this, and just tell me. I'll be glad to dig. Just tell me what it is. Sometimes it's clarifying the expectations, but we got to do it from a position of not blamey, attacky, persecutory kind of stuff, but come at it from a place of vulnerability. I want to do better. I want to please you. I'm not feeling like I'm doing it. Can we talk about it?
Yeah.
And if you're somebody who can't do that, then check your resume, maybe. There are places people need to leave, but that shouldn't be the first step. Most of these things are fixable.
Yeah. So that's when, so I like that. And I want to just kind of end here and talk about the idea of that feedback. That's when you're asking, vulnerably for kind of that feedback, or, hey, help me to understand. What about on the flip side? If you're having to give some feedback and you're aiming for that corner 4 relationship, it's not like you want to just gloss over stuff and say it's all rosy. You want to give good feedback, true feedback. So what would be some advice on how to deliver that feedback and maintain that corner 4, but also be still truthful and honest?
Yeah. Okay. Well, remember this. Everything is a garden, and every garden has a soil. All right. So we're talking about tossing feedback into a garden. Well, have we cultivated the soil that it's going to land on or not? That's the first question. So you go into a team that's never really normalized giving good feedback, and you give it, a lot of them can just they've never seen that before. A group enforces its norms. So you got to set the norms. I think it was at GLS, the Global Leadership Summit a few years ago, Ed Catmull, who did the merger, with Pixar and Disney. He said when he put those two together, he realized that their main problem was not content, talent, all that. The main problem was the culture. And he needed to work on developing the culture so it could actually have the innovation that they wanted. So he did a couple of things with that innovation team. The first thing he did was he established a norm. I thought this was amazing. He says, okay, so here's what we're going to do. You guys go work on the movie. It takes a couple of years to get this, and everybody's put their best efforts into it and all this. And then they get the final version, and they bring it into the room with the team, the writers and everybody. And before they watch the movie, they all agree to this one thing. And here's the sentence he said: "This movie sucks." Before they watch it. Everybody's worked their butts off for 2 years. And then he says, we're all going to agree this movie sucks. Our job is to make it not suck. So what has he said? Obviously, everybody knows that it doesn't suck. But what he's saying is, whatever we've done before we watch it, we know it can be better. What we're after here is we're after the best movie. So there's a level playing field. Everybody's going in there with the eyes of curiosity, not judgment. And then he says, ideas have no rank. Whether it's the intern or the CEO, everybody's ideas get out here. There's no bad ideas. There's something in every idea. I love the phrase, we're going to love every thought or every idea for 5 minutes, because there's something in there. There's a reason a person thinks that. So you take away the judgment and you develop this soil. Now, in that soil, you can throw the fertilizer of feedback. You can throw the fertilizer of, let's up the standard here, because you taught people we're going to be a growth-oriented group, not a judgment-oriented group. So every piece of feedback doesn't validate or invalidate you as a person. It's just a thought that we want to get curious about. And you got to build the soil. You've got to work on the team. You got to work on those relationships. So I'm free to say whatever I want. I remember when John Townsend and I were writing books together, and we built a hospital company, and outside people would come into our meetings, and John and I would go, "Are you kidding me? That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard." And we're talking, and they're looking at us like, "You guys talk to each other like that?" And we're laughing. Because of course we do. We love each other. We know that's not personal. You gotta build soil where we know we desire that. And if you got somebody on your team that doesn't desire feedback, then you got to work on that. Now, I know there's a big movement out there about feedback's bad. That's just ultimately, in an absolute sense, tell an airline pilot that. You don't want feedback? Come on, you got an instrument panel that's going to keep you from crashing, right? But I think what they're saying there is feedback that demotivates. There's ways to do it that take people down. I've got a chapter in the book totally on all of this called Defanging the Beast. What you got to do is, when we're having coaching and correcting and helping and pushing people, it's got to be done in certain ways where it doesn't feel like fangs are coming at me. It's got to feel actually motivating.
Well, yeah, I love the analogy of the soil, and just, again, great observations on that trust that you have to have there to really give that honest feedback. So
hey, Brian, look.
Yeah.
An hour ago when we were setting this up, I'm in my den, right? I got the camera angle a certain way, it's pointing more over that way, and you tell me, I think it'd look better. That's feedback. What if I said, so you don't think I can do this? You don't think I've ever done this before, Brian? Come on. What? You don't respect, and you see people get persecuted by, we need each other to get better. But we've got to cultivate individually, interpersonally, and organizationally a place where that's good.
Well, thank you for taking that feedback well and moving the camera. All appreciate it.
I'm going to talk to you. You're going to get an email about it.
Yeah. Hey, thank you so much for your time and insights. I just really appreciate all that. And Adrian's going to close us out and give us some next steps on how they can get access to some more content from you. But we really are grateful for your time today. Thank you so much.
Hey, I love our partnership and everything that y'all are doing. And so all you people out there, just spread the word. They're doing great things.
Awesome. Thanks, Dr. Cloud. Appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Cloud, for that amazing webinar, and Brian talking about disconnection, bad connection, pseudo connection, and real connection. And you can find more from Dr. Cloud on these topics of relationships in his book, The Power of the Other. And you can also check out Dr. Cloud's Leadership University at www.leaduTV.tv. For more information on leadership training available for companies of all sizes. And lastly, just in case you didn't know, RightNow Media at Work is a platform that is designed with Christian business leaders in mind. This is a phenomenal resource that will help you communicate to your employees that not only do you care about their professional development, but also their personal development. This platform consists of video resources to help your employees with their finances, marriage, parenting, mental health, recovery, children and teens, as well as leadership development, teamwork and conflict, servant leadership, and work as worship. Use our platform to help you identify and equip leaders, as well as strengthen the core values of your organization. This streaming library of videos includes more content from Dr. Cloud, as well as from other experts like John Maxwell, Patrick Lencioni, and more. The RightNow Media at Work app is available on the phone or any device, so your team can take these video resources with them wherever they go. If you would like more information on how to bring this invaluable resource to your organization, please visit www.rightnowmediaatwork.org to learn more. Again, we thank you so much for your participation on this webinar, and blessings to you all from the RightNow Media family. Goodbye.